Penn State's Forgotten Predator, 1978. Before Jerry Sandusky ever became a household name, Penn State already had a predator hiding within its football program. In 1978, linebacker Todd Hodne was a member of Joe Paterno's team. On the field, he barely made an impact. Off the field, he left scars that would last a lifetime. Hodne embarked on a violent spree of sexual assaults against women near campus. Authorities later described him as the most dangerous, physically imposing, and ruthless criminal they had ever encountered. His victims included students, young mothers, and women just walking home at night, all terrorized while Penn State football kept rolling toward national relevance. Hodne was eventually expelled from the team, but not before dozens of women had been attacked. After leaving Penn State, his crimes escalated. He was convicted of rape and years later of murder. For decades, his story was buried, overshadowed by Penn State's glory years on the field, and later by the Sandusky scandal that defined the program's darkest chapter. When ESPN revisited Hodne's story more than 40 years later, it revealed a haunting truth. The warning signs had been there, but no one acted with the urgency needed to stop him. The program's silence left countless victims to suffer while football marched on. Northwestern's hazing disaster, 2023. In the summer of 2023, Northwestern, and university, better known for academics than athletics, found itself at the center of one of college football's ugliest scandals. It started with whispers about hazing inside the Wildcats' locker room, but what came out publicly painted a disturbing picture of systemic abuse. An internal investigation found a pattern of problematic conduct stretching across years. Former players described hazing rituals that included coerced sexual acts, degrading punishments, and forced nude drills. The allegations were shocking, not only for their cruelty, but also for how normalized they had become inside the program. According to reports, some coaches allegedly signaled when hazing rituals were supposed to happen, while team leaders enforced them as a twisted rite of passage. What began as tradition crossed the line into humiliation and abuse, creating a culture where young players felt trapped, powerless to speak out for fear of being ostracized. At first, the university tried to quietly resolve it. Head coach Pat Fitzgerald, a Northwestern legend, was handed only a 2-week suspension. But when the graphic details leaked to the press, the outrage was immediate. Within days, Fitzgerald was fired after 17 years as head coach, and Northwestern's proud football reputation was in ruins. The scandal raised larger questions too. How could such toxic behavior persist for so long in a program celebrated for discipline and academics? It became a reminder that hazing isn't confined to small-time programs or obscure teams. Even elite universities can harbor a dark underbelly when accountability slips. Maryland's Deadly Workouts, 2018. In May 2018, the University of Maryland football program was shaken by a tragedy that should never have happened. During a grueling off-season conditioning session in the heat, 19-year-old offensive lineman Jordan McNair collapsed. Trainers initially treated it as simple exhaustion, but McNair wasn't just tired. He was in the early stages of heat stroke. For over an hour, his body temperature rose unchecked. Investigations later revealed the staff failed to administer the most basic and life-saving treatment, cold water immersion. By the time McNair was transported to the hospital, it was too late. He died 2 weeks later from complications of heat stroke. The aftermath was damning. Reports described a toxic culture under head coach DJ Durkin, one where players were driven through punishing workouts in a climate of fear. Speaking up meant being labeled weak, and even medical distress wasn't taken seriously. McNair's death wasn't just tragic, it was labeled preventable. The fallout was immediate and national. Durkin was placed on leave and eventually fired. Maryland's president publicly apologized to McNair's family. The university accepted full responsibility and later reached a $3.5 million settlement with his parents. But the deeper impact was bigger than Maryland. The incident forced college football to re-examine its training practices. The NCAA and athletic programs across the country implemented stricter workout protocols, emphasizing player safety and medical oversight. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm. Notre Dame Tower Tragedy, 2010. On October 27, 2010, Notre Dame suffered a tragedy that had nothing to do with the field itself, but everything to do with the choices surrounding football. Declan Sullivan was a 20-year-old student videographer tasked with filming football practice. On that day, winds in South Bend were dangerously high, gusting over 50 miles per hour. Despite weather warnings, Sullivan was sent up on a scissor lift above the practice field to get overhead shots. As practice went on, the lift swayed violently. Sullivan tweeted from his phone, clearly terrified. "I guess I've lived long enough. This is terrifying." Minutes later, the lift toppled. Sullivan was killed when it crashed to the ground. Investigations afterward found Notre Dame had ignored repeated warnings about the high winds. There were no safety measures in place to prevent a student worker from being put in such danger. The state of Indiana fined the university for safety violations, and the decision-making of head coach Brian Kelly and other administrators came under heavy scrutiny. The university eventually reached a settlement with Sullivan's family, but the damage was irreversible. His death was not the result of a violent hit or an on-field accident. It was the result of negligence, a choice to prioritize practice footage over basic safety. The Seberg suicide at Notre Dame, 2010. Just weeks after Declan Sullivan's death, Notre Dame faced another tragedy tied to its football program, one that raised even deeper questions about how the school protected its athletes versus how it protected its students. Elizabeth Lizzie Seberg was a 19-year-old student at nearby St. Mary's College. In August 2010, she reported to campus police that she had been sexually assaulted by a Notre Dame football player. The days that followed were filled with fear. Seberg received threatening text messages from another player, warning her not to pursue the complaint. "Don't do anything you would regret." 10 days later, Lizzie Seberg died by suicide. The handling of the case drew immediate outrage. Campus police didn't interview the accused player until 15 days after Lizzie filed her report, and 5 days after her death. No charges were filed. Her parents later said they felt shut out by the university and misled about the progress of the investigation. To many observers, it looked like Notre Dame had prioritized protecting its football program over the life of a young woman. The tragedy became a rallying point in conversations about how universities address sexual assault, especially when athletes are involved. The imbalance of power, the delays in investigation, and the lack of transparency all left the impression of a system stacked against victims. The Booster from Hell, Miami's Nevin Shapiro, 2011. Few scandals in college football ever reached the level of salacious detail that came out of Miami in 2011. At the center of it all was Nevin Shapiro, a flashy South Florida businessman who ran a $930 million Ponzi scheme. While defrauding investors, he was also funneling millions into the Hurricanes football program as its self-proclaimed biggest booster. For nearly a decade, Shapiro provided Miami players with everything NCAA rules forbade: cash handouts, nightclub tabs, yacht parties, luxury hotel suites, jewelry, and even prostitutes. He once bragged about paying for an abortion for a player's girlfriend. According to Shapiro, as many as 72 players received improper benefits from him during the 2000s. He turned Miami's nightlife into an extension of the program, with VIP sections at clubs reserved for his players, stocked with champagne and attention. Players drove cars financed by Shapiro, stayed in his mansions, and lived like celebrities. To him, it wasn't just support, it was access. He wanted to be in the locker room, on the sidelines, and part of the Hurricanes' swagger. When his Ponzi scheme collapsed, Shapiro was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. From behind bars, he turned whistleblower, airing every detail of his decade-long relationship with Miami football. The NCAA launched an investigation, and while they couldn't prove every allegation, the damage was done. Miami imposed self-sanctions, including 2 bowl bans, and lost scholarships. The Hurricanes' reputation, once defined by dominance, became tainted by corruption. The Nevin Shapiro saga wasn't just a case of a rogue booster, it was a reminder of how easily the hunger for money, influence, and success can corrupt a program. Auburn players gunned down, 2012. On June 9, 2012, Auburn University was rocked by a tragedy that left the football community stunned. At an off-campus pool party near the school, An argument escalated into a shooting that claimed the lives of 2 former Auburn players and injured a current one. Ladarius Phillips and Ed Christian, both former Auburn linemen, were killed, while Eric Mack, a current offensive lineman, was critically wounded but survived. The shooter, a 22-year-old man with a violent history, opened fire after a dispute that reportedly started over a woman. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with dozens of students fleeing for cover as shots rang out. The suspect fled and sparked a manhunt that lasted several days before he surrendered to police. He was later convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. The murders sent shockwaves through Auburn, a school still basking in the glow of its 2010 national championship. Candlelight vigils drew thousands, with coaches and teammates struggling to process how their community could lose young men so suddenly to senseless violence. The Marshall plane crash, 1970. On November 14th, 1970, college football suffered its darkest day. Marshall University's football team had just played an away game at East Carolina and was flying home to Huntington, West Virginia. On board the chartered Southern Airways DC-9 were 75 people, players, coaches, staff, boosters, and flight crew. As the plane approached Tri-State Airport on a rainy, foggy night, it clipped trees just short of the runway. The aircraft slammed into a hillside and exploded. Every single person on board was killed. Among the dead were 36 Marshall players, 9 coaches, 25 boosters, and 5 crew members. The crash devastated Huntington. Families lost sons, fathers, and brothers all at once. The entire core of the Marshall football program was wiped out. University officials even considered shutting the program down altogether. The grief was that overwhelming, but in the end, Marshall chose to rebuild. With the help of students, walk-ons, and transfers from other schools, the Thundering Herd fielded a team the following season. Though they struggled on the field for years afterward, the decision to keep playing became a symbol of resilience. The tragedy was later memorialized in the film We Are Marshall, but no movie can fully capture the pain of an entire team and community gone in an instant. The 1970 Marshall plane crash remains perhaps the most haunting moment in college football history, a story of unthinkable loss, and of a university and town that somehow found a way to carry on. UVA shooting on campus, 2022. On November 13, 2022, the University of Virginia experienced one of the darkest tragedies in college football history. A group of students, including several football players, were returning to campus on a charter bus after a class trip. What should have been an ordinary Sunday night turned into horror. A former UVA player, also a student at the university, allegedly opened fire on the bus. 3 football players, Lavelle Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry, were killed. 2 other students were wounded. The attack was sudden and shocking, leaving their teammates and classmates traumatized. The shooter fled, sparking a tense 12-hour campus lockdown while police searched for him. He was eventually arrested the following morning, but by then, the Charlottesville community was in mourning. Candlelight vigils drew thousands of people. Teammates, coaches, and family members spoke of the 3 victims not just as athletes, but as beloved sons, brothers, and friends. In the weeks that followed, details emerged that the shooter had been on UVA's radar for prior behavioral and weapon-related issues. That only deepened the sense of frustration and disbelief. How could warning signs have been missed? And how could such violence erupt within a close-knit team environment? The remainder of Virginia's football season was canceled, an acknowledgement that there were bigger things than games to be addressed. The university instead turned its focus toward grieving, honoring the players' legacies, and healing as a community. Northern Colorado's murderous punter, 2006. In 2006, Northern Colorado University, a small program that rarely made national headlines, suddenly became infamous for a crime that sounded more like a tabloid story than a sports headline. Mitch Kozad, a backup punter desperate to earn the starting job, decided the only way to move up the depth chart was to eliminate his competition. One night in September, starting punter Rafael Mendoza was walking to his car in a dark campus parking lot when a masked attacker ambushed him. Mendoza was stabbed in his kicking leg, the very leg he used to punt. He survived, though badly wounded, and investigators quickly zeroed in on Kozad. The motive was as bizarre as it was chilling. He wanted the starting spot so badly that he literally tried to disable his rival. The case became national news, and Kozad was soon dubbed the punter who stabbed his competition. In 2007, he was convicted of second-degree assault, though the jury deadlocked on the more serious attempted murder charge, and sentenced to prison. Mendoza, meanwhile, eventually recovered but never regained his starting role at Northern Colorado. For a program that had little national visibility, the crime cast a long shadow. It exposed the extreme pressures and warped priorities that can emerge in even the smallest corners of college football. A position battle that should have been settled on the practice field instead turned into a true crime story that stained Northern Colorado's name. Army's cheating catastrophe, 1951. In 1951, one of the most respected institutions in America, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, was brought to its knees by a scandal that shattered both its football program and its honor code. That year, it was revealed that 90 cadets, including 37 football players, had systematically cheated on exams. At West Point, the honor code was sacred. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. The scandal showed just how far some were willing to go to keep star athletes on the field. Cadets had been circulating stolen exam answers and recycled test questions. Tutors were suspected of helping athletes bend rules, and the culture around the football team had allowed the cheating to spread unchecked. When the truth came out, the punishment was unprecedented. Every cadet involved was expelled. The impact on Army football was immediate and devastating. Just years earlier, the Black Knights had been a national powerhouse, producing legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis. But with nearly the entire varsity roster dismissed, the 1951 team stumbled to a 2-7 record. What had once been a symbol of discipline and excellence became a cautionary tale. The scandal also shook the public's faith in West Point itself. Congress debated whether football had compromised the academy's mission, with some even calling for the program to be suspended entirely. Ultimately, Army football survived, but the cribbing scandal scarred its reputation for decades. Woody Hayes' sideline assault, 1978. Woody Hayes was already a legend by the late 1970s, the face of Ohio State football, a Hall of Fame coach with 5 national championships, and a fiery personality who commanded both fear and respect. But on December 29, 1978, his legendary career ended in one shocking moment during the Gator Bowl. With 2 minutes left in a tense game against Clemson, Ohio State quarterback Art Schlichter threw an interception. Clemson's Charlie Bauman picked off the pass and was tackled along the Buckeyes' sideline. As Bauman got to his feet, Woody Hayes, furious and unable to control his temper, grabbed the opposing player by the jersey and punched him in the throat. The punch was caught by TV cameras and replayed across the country. Players and coaches rushed in to separate the melee, but the damage was done. Hayes, a 65-year-old icon of the sport, had struck an opposing student athlete on live television. The very next morning, Ohio State officials fired him. After 28 years as head coach, his career ended not with a championship or a farewell, but with disgrace. The incident became one of the most infamous coaching meltdowns in sports history. It overshadowed Clemson's 17-15 victory and permanently scarred Hayes' legacy. Though remembered for his brilliance and success, he's equally remembered for the violent outburst that ended his career. 1905, football's deadliest season. In 1905, college football nearly destroyed itself. The sport was wildly popular, but brutally dangerous. With no forward pass, players clashed in violent mass formations, like the Flying Wedge, essentially turning scrimmages into organized brawls. Helmets were primitive, protective gear was minimal, and refereeing was inconsistent. That year, the violence reached a breaking point. By the end of the 1905 season, at least 19 players were dead, and another 137 seriously injured. Fatalities included skull fractures, spinal cord injuries, and internal bleeding, tragedies that often involved teenagers barely out of high school. Newspapers dubbed it a death harvest, and public opinion began to turn against the game. One emblematic incident was the death of Union College halfback Harold Moore, who died of a brain hemorrhage after being kicked in the head during a game against NYU. His death and others fueled outrage across the country, with editorials calling football gladiatorial combat in disguise. The national outcry reached the White House. President Theodore Roosevelt, an outspoken fan of the sport, convened a summit with college leaders. He gave them an ultimatum: reform the rules or risk seeing football banned altogether. The result was a series of landmark changes in 1906. The forward pass was legalized. Mass plays like the wedge were abolished. A neutral line of scrimmage was created, and more emphasis was placed on player safety. These reforms saved the sport, laying the foundation for modern football. WSU's quarterback, suicide, and CTE, 2018. In January 2018, Washington State University quarterback Tyler Hilinski was found dead in his apartment from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Just 21 years old, Hilinski had started in the Holiday Bowl weeks earlier and was widely expected to take over as the Cougars' full-time starter the following season. His death shocked teammates, fans, and the entire college football world. At first, it was a mystery. Hilinski had seemed cheerful, hardworking, and beloved by those around him. There were no obvious warning signs, but the questions grew louder. How could a young man with such promise reach such a devastating breaking point? The answers came after his family agreed to have his brain examined. The autopsy revealed Hilinski had stage 1 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the degenerative brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. Doctors were stunned. They told the family that his brain looked like that of a man decades older, possibly in his 60s. His parents have said they don't blame football alone, but they believe the disease, combined with the pressures of being a quarterback, contributed to his depression. His younger brother, Ryan, later became a quarterback at South Carolina and Northwestern, playing in his brother's honor, while also raising awareness about mental health. In the wake of Tyler's death, his family founded Hilinski's Hope, a nonprofit dedicated to ending the stigma around mental illness in athletes and improving support systems on campuses. His story became a rallying cry for more open conversations about concussions, CTE, and the invisible battles young athletes face. Minnesota's boycott and sexual assault saga, 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota football program was engulfed in a dark and complicated scandal that blurred the lines between justice, discipline, and loyalty. It began when a female student accused multiple Gopher players of sexually assaulting her at an off-campus party in September. Police investigated, but ultimately did not pursue criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. However, the university launched its own Title IX investigation, and its findings told a different story. The inquiry determined that the woman's account was credible, and that at least 10 players had violated conduct codes related to sexual assault and harassment. In December, right before Minnesota was set to play in the Holiday Bowl, the university announced the suspensions of those 10 players. The team's response was explosive. Players held a press conference, announcing a full boycott of all practices and games, even threatening not to play in the bowl. They framed it as a stand for due process, claiming their teammates were punished without a fair trial in court. But then, the 82-page Title IX report was released to the public, detailing graphic allegations of group assault and corroborating parts of the victim's story. Once the disturbing details became public, the boycott crumbled. Support for the players' protest evaporated, and within 2 days, the team ended its standoff. In the end, 4 players were expelled. Others were suspended, and the program's reputation was badly damaged. The Holiday Bowl went ahead, but the scandal left a permanent stain. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed. Thanks for watching.